Omar, let me start by asking you a very basic question. The way we have all learned to understand and access the meaning of democracy is electoral democracy. We think that when we conduct a free and fair election, it represents the will and the sentiment of the people, or at least a majority of the people. You yourself have said in Jammu and Kashmir more than once that elections do not necessarily do that. Does that present a very, very extraordinary dilemma where elections are a key part of a possible solution to this dispute, and it is a dispute of Jammu and Kashmir, this conflict, but at the same time you have to find other mechanisms outside of mainline democracy that will speak to those aspirations?
Well, I think it's important to understand that at no point have I suggested that elections don't represent the will of the people, because obviously they do. What I've said is that it is a mistake to take an election and convert it into a referendum, because then all you're doing is strengthening the hands of those people who have made a business out of trying to get people to boycott elections. Every time you have an unsuccessful election, they turn around and say, see, this is because people don't believe in the Indian system. The flip side of that is that every time you have a successful election, then you have people in Delhi and elsewhere saying that, see, so that because so many people have come out and voted, it means that Jammu and Kashmir doesn't have a problem that needs to be resolved. I think both arguments are wrong. People don't participate in elections in Jammu and Kashmir because they want to reflect or express their opinion vis-a-vis the actual problem that exists there. I have constantly maintained that elections are to elect governments, whether in the center, whether in the state, or at the panchayat level. And we shouldn't confuse that with what the people actually want to see in terms of an actual solution. And that, I think, reflects sentiment in all three regions of the state. I mean, just because people participate in an election in Jammu and Kashmir for a panchayat in Ladakh doesn't mean that people there don't want to see union territory status there. Yeah. Similarly, for Jammu, there are those who would like to see separate statehood for Jammu. And there are those in Kashmir, whether you like it or not, who would come forward, participate in an election for local government or for the state, but whose actual desire may be to see a solution to the problem outside of the constitution. So while elections do reflect the sentiment of the people, I'm saying don't confuse that with the overall need to resolve the Kashmir issue.
You've just overseen the first major panchayat election after 20 years. We saw near 80% turnout. We saw some candidates actually taking a bullet, or at least one woman candidate actually being shot at for that, defying boycott calls by separatists. Not to read too much into that, but would you say that when you look at different elections in the history of Jammu and Kashmir, perhaps the origin of the problem can be rooted back to elections that were widely acknowledged to be rigged? And perhaps a watershed moment could be that election overseen by Lingdo didn't bring good news for you, but was a watershed moment for the state?
Well, I think if you want to trace the roots of the last 20 years of trouble in Jammu and Kashmir, I think you have to go a little further back than just the election of '87. I think it starts really in '84 with the overthrow of the government that my father headed at that time, which was orchestrated from Raj Bhavan, and which the people felt really went against their sentiments and their aspirations. Then, added to that, I think we heaped insult on injury with the Rajiv Farooq Accord, because we basically shrunk the space for legitimate opposition. The way things functioned in the state, and particularly in the Kashmir Valley, was that if you were happy with the National Conference, so be it, but if you were unhappy, you had the option of moving to the Congress and vice versa. The moment both these two parties came together, you shrunk the space for opposition within the mainstream of polity in J&K. You gave rise to the Muslim United Front. The elections of '87, yes, no smoke without fire. One will assume that there was some amount of trouble in that election, and you've seen the results of that over the last 2 decades. But, I mean, if one bad election can create a problem, then simplistically speaking, one good election should be able to resolve that. And you've had more than one good election. You've had actually 4 good elections. You've had the 2002 assembly elections, you've had 2 parliament elections, and a panchayat elections, and another assembly one. So 5 good elections in between. I think people are beginning to see a restoration of their faith in the electoral system. Again, I come back to that point, let's not confuse it with the overall need to resolve the problem. But there is far greater faith in electoral democracy in Jammu and Kashmir today than there perhaps was 10, 12 years ago.
Share a little bit of your personal journey and your personal learnings, because I think what many people outside the valley especially do not understand is that in the state it can take one event, one misdemeanor perhaps by security forces, one poorly handled situation that can, take a moment of peace and make it a phase of volatility. Last year was a hellish year for you. It was a hellish year for the state, and it perhaps was triggered by the death of a young 17-year-old boy, Tehelka-Newweek. I remember meeting you many times in that year. From that year to now, how have you changed as a chief minister, and what have you learned?
Oh, I learned a lot. I think all of us in that state have learned a lot. What I've taken from last year is that you can't ignore even the smallest of incidents. Last year, the actual spark that ignited everything was the death of Tehelka-Newweek, hit by a stray tear gas shell. But what actually changed the mood on the ground was the death of 3 people who were taken to the line of control and killed, unfortunately, by our own security forces, and then termed as militants in order to gain promotions and rewards. And that became the foundation for a protest movement that led to the trouble spreading over almost 5 months of summer. So we've learned a lot from that. Obviously, personally, I learned that you don't ignore anything that happens in Jammu and Kashmir, no matter how insignificant it might seem. And perhaps the whole response to situations has been much better this year than it was last year, which perhaps has shown the sort of results that it has. Last year, by this time, unfortunately, we'd had more than 100 deaths as a result of the security forces dealing with protests. So far, touch wood, we haven't had a single casualty this year at all, and we hope to be able to continue this trend going forward.
You're grappling right now with a very complex dispute around the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And just for the benefit of our audience, very quickly, it is an act which gives many powers and protective cover to the soldiers operating in a conflict zone, but perhaps its most controversial aspect is that if you want to prosecute a soldier for an alleged human rights violation, you need the center's go-ahead before that happens. You spoke about the Machil fake encounter triggering last year's unrest. The fact is that whether it's Machil or Pathribal, the encounter that took place after Chitti Singhpura, for more than a decade in that case, you have actually not seen a resolution in those cases. Where do you think the stumbling block is? Is it in the mindset of Delhi, which thinks that somehow taking this power away from the army is to undermine the soldier? Is it a kind of ideological rigidity? Or
problem is with the perception of what the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is there for and why it's required. At the end of the day, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is required to give legal cover to the army to operate internally, as opposed to on the border or the line of control, which is actually where they're supposed to be. Now, my line of reasoning is that there are areas within the Kashmir Valley and large parts of Jammu where the army has not needed to operate for more than a few years now. Now, if the army has not needed to operate there, why do they need the legal cover? I'm not for a moment suggesting that we withdraw this act from the border or the line of control where they're needed. I'm not suggesting we withdraw it in Baramulla or Kupwara or Sopore, where there are regular encounters with militants. But in those areas where you haven't seen army action in the last few years, why does the army need cover to operate there since they're not operating? And at the end of the day, when do we start sharing the benefits of peace with the people? We keep talking about a peace dividend, yet the people don't see that dividend. The army, the security forces, the government in Delhi, the government in Srinagar, we time and again talk about how much the situation has improved. And yet when it comes to actually translating that improvement into something on the ground that matters to people, we pull back. And that's why I've said that, look, this is the time where we need to go forward, do something. Look, it's an act that we want to withdraw. It's not a commandment handed down from God that we can't change our minds. I mean, worst case scenario, and I said this in an interview to you a few days ago. I mean, what's the worst case scenario? That somehow things unravel, things go back to being a little uncomfortable. What's to suggest that we can't reimpose that act and clean up the area again? But, I mean, unless we're willing to take a little bit of a risk, how long are we supposed to wait?
I asked you in that. You have a very easy job convincing this audience. I think we need to send them to defense headquarters in Delhi. But I asked you in that interview, not drawing any correlation, that Indians tend to be quite sentimental and defensive about the forces. So it's always a very difficult discussion to have. And that people are going to say to you, hey, Omar, at the same time that Imran Khan is sitting in Lahore and saying, Indian army, go back from Kashmir, you're actually saying the same thing.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not for a moment suggesting that withdrawing of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is the same as withdrawing the army from Jammu and Kashmir. I'm saying that the army will continue to have a role in Jammu and Kashmir so long as we have two hostile neighbors in the form of China and Pakistan. What I'm suggesting is that over time, given the improvement in the situation, we can reduce the role of the army in internal security duties, which is not their mandate. That's all I'm suggesting. So let's not draw a correlation between what Imran Khan is saying and what I'm saying. He's suggesting that you empty the Kashmir Valley of the troops. I'm saying that the troops should go back to doing what they were originally tasked with doing, which is protecting the border and the line of control and leaving the internal areas which are relatively more peaceful to the J&K police, the CRPF and others.
Leadership in a democracy, and especially in a volatile, challenging state like Jammu and Kashmir, is often standing up for a thing that you believe in, even if you're lonely doing that, even if you're alone doing that. Would you say that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is one such issue where you may find yourself standing alone in relation to New Delhi or many parts of the government in New Delhi? And how far are you willing to go to actually stand by your intention?
Look, I'm not, again, I mean, it's almost like deja vu. You and I've had this conversation a few days ago.
They don't know that.
That's exactly, they don't know it. And look, I mean, it would sound very glamorous and it would give great headlines if I was to turn around and say, look, I'll leave my chair if I don't get this.
But would you?
But I'm not given to such pronouncements and statements. If I have to, I will, but I'm not threatening. I don't want to be seen to be threatening this. Like if I don't get some sort of spoiled child, that if I don't get my way, I'm going to sit and sulk in the corner. That's not my way of operating. I'm hoping to be able to convince those that need convincing that this is something that needs to be done. And I passionately believe that it should be done. Beyond that, if I have to stand alone and wave the flag, I'll continue to do that because I believe somebody has to. And if that person has to be me, it won't be the first time, it won't be the last time, and I'll do it.
So if you can't convince them, if you're not able to convince the people
Look, let's just
who
say,
need to be convinced.
Let's just say I've got a few important people convinced and standing in my corner. I need to widen that net a little bit. I've been advised, advised would perhaps be the right word, to consult a few more people. I'll do that, and we'll just take it from there.
Omar, what do you think it is that, and I've noticed this in so many interviews that one does with you or forums like this where you speak, that people outside Jammu and Kashmir have a pretty easy time relating to what you're saying. They identify, I've noticed this, they identify with you, they see you as a commonsensical, middle-of-the-road, rational person who's willing to take a stand. But in Jammu and Kashmir, you're dealing with a very different kind of volatility. They'll often say, Omar is aloof. Omar spends too much time on his BlackBerry. Omar doesn't come out and talk to us enough. Do you spend too much time on your BlackBerry?
Well, yes. On that count, guilty as charged. I'm trying to be a little better. I mean, I haven't pulled it out of my pocket, even though I can feel it.
That would be a bit much if you were
I can feel it beeping.
I
can feel it beeping in my pocket as we talk. Look, I like using new and new means of communication. I think it's great. It empowers you even further. I don't for a moment confuse, let's say, Twitter or Facebook with actual face-to-face contact.
Yeah.
I mean, they are useful means, but they're not an alternative. Am I aloof? I'm not my father. Okay? I mean, let's face it, I'm not.
Do you wish you were?
I can't be him. I mean, as much as in some circumstances I wish I was, I'm not. I mean,
So you're not taking Shabana Azmi behind a motorbike around the Dal Lake?
No comment. But no, I mean, I walked in and sat in the corner at the side here, and I was quite happy on my own. My dad would have plunged into the middle and probably knows half the audience here. That's him, this is me. We're not the same people. So yes, I guess when people draw comparisons compared to him, I am a bit more aloof, a bit cut away. I mean, I can't change my basic personality. I am trying, but I guess there are points beyond which I can't go.
How much influence does he have on your choices? I remember when there was the so-called sex scandal in Jammu and Kashmir, and you said it's a load of rubbish, and you said, I'm quitting. If you think this is what it's all about, here you go, and you walked out of that assembly. And your father had a few words to say to you then, didn't he?
That's putting it politely. He yelled at me. I have not been yelled at him like that, I guess, since I was probably about that high. But I guess both as the president of my party as well as my father, he felt that my reaction was more emotional than anything else. I felt that this was what I wanted to do, and that's what I did.
You're on Twitter in a hyper-communicative age where the central government needs to be persuaded all the time to communicate more. As an alliance partner, do you feel that one of the failings of politics today and one of the failings of the ruling party has been that there isn't enough direct contact with the people?
Unfortunately, and I'll probably get myself into trouble for this, a lot of the users of Twitter actually scare away people who would otherwise be willing to come forward and use that forum. Yeah. The kind of...
Bile.
I mean, well, yeah, I mean, honestly, the kind of stuff one has to read on that simply because Twitter, I mean, seriously, you have to seek some of the stuff that ends up on my timeline simply because they have the advantage of geographical distance and anonymity. I mean, I'd love for some of those people to come and actually say that to me face to face, even without some of the security that I have hanging around me. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, I would probably line their teeth up in height order for some of the stuff that they say, but I mean, that's just the way it is. So, I mean, I can understand why some people look at Twitter and then say, well, this is fine, but it's not for me. There have been a few times in the last couple of months when I wondered whether I should be here or not, but I don't like being chased out of places.
So you've stayed the course because you don't want to give them the satisfaction of...
Yeah, I don't want them. I mean, I got chased out of blogging. I don't want to be chased away from Twitter. So I'm not as active as I used to be, but I won't give them the satisfaction of chasing me away.
I understand that sentiment. A little bit of that, I think, is something that we all experience. I want to ask you, there's so many of our friends and guests from Pakistan here. When we had the representative from the Pakistan end of Kashmir come and visit you, and you took him around in a chopper ride, it became a big issue. It became a big controversy. What would you say to Pakistan through the people sitting here?
Nothing that I haven't already said. I mean, it's not my own sentiment. It's a sentiment that's been reflected and articulated so many times in the past. Look, the fact is that we're stuck with each other. As much as we might like to move off and find new neighbors, it's not going to happen. We're stuck with each other. So we might as well make the most of that situation. And there are instances where cooperation has worked, not the least of which, at the cost of my state, is the Indus Water Treaty. It's survived 3.5 wars, 2 decades of terrorism, and so much more. So, I mean, it just shows that if we really want to put our heads together and work out something, we can work together. I just don't see why we have to constantly be battling over stuff that really should be settled and put aside.
The Indus Water Treaty, though, the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly voted unanimously to scrap it at one point.
Can you blame them? I mean, 6 rivers to be divided between 2 countries. The 3 that flow through Punjab you keep with India, the 3 that flow through my state you give to Pakistan. It's a little unfair. I mean, you could have kept 1 for us. Yeah? I mean, honestly, even a 2:1 ratio, even a 2:1 ratio would have been acceptable. But when you go 3-0, it's a little unfair.
So what do you plan to do about it?
I can't do anything. I can keep harping about it and hope that somebody compensates us somewhere down the line. But like I said, it's a treaty that stood the test of time. It's not going to be overturned just because the people of Jammu and Kashmir have a grouse with it. Fine, if that's what we have to sacrifice in the national interest, so be it. But a little bit of help to compensate for what we've lost on account of this treaty wouldn't be out of place.
What has been your most difficult moment as Chief Minister? Would you say it was last year when 109 young people were killed on the streets of the valley? Or would you say it was more recently when you were actually accused by the opposition in your state of being involved in the murder of a National Conference worker whom you felt you were dealing with in a corruption case, but he did come to meet you at your house? Which of these two would you find the most challenging moment in a sense?
Oh, without a doubt, last year. Without a doubt. I mean, what I did this year, I would do again.
No regrets, no mishandling?
Look, I mean, somebody comes to me with an allegation of corruption. I hear the person out and hand them over to the police. You tell me what is wrong in that. Now, it's a different matter. I wish the person hadn't died. And obviously, the stress of having to now cough up crores that he had collected in various names obviously got to him. Now, this is something that needs to be investigated and put away. So, but last year, I mean, saw the death of 100+ people of various ages. I mean, you can't even begin to compare what I went through last year in terms of the sheer guilt of having to deal with that. I mean, I used to dread my phone ringing. I had a separate ringtone for my Director General of Police, a separate ringtone for my intelligence chief, and I only had to hear those ringtones to break out into a cold sweat. To this day, my immediate staff are not allowed to use those ringtones. No, they're not, seriously, because it brings back such horrible memories of what I went through last year, that this year when my secretary changed his phone, and he had a similar ringtone, I had to tell him, look, please, can you change this? Because I really don't want to hear this ringtone again. It was that bad. So you can't even begin to compare last year to this year.
I'm sure, and we've all seen you evolve and mature as a leader, as a politician. What do you regret the most about your tenure, and what gives you the most satisfaction?
Well, obviously, I regret everything that happened last year. There isn't a time that I don't ask myself, is there something I could have done to have at least reduced the number of casualties that we faced? I mean, yes, we've learned lessons, but they're very costly lessons. They've come at the cost of more than 100 lives. It's not easy to reconcile yourself to that. I mean, that's something I'm going to carry with me to the grave. But lessons learned, implemented, and I think the biggest thing is not to repeat mistakes of the past. What else do I regret? I guess I regret being raked over the coals as often as I am. I mean, I can't see another chief minister who gets subjected to the kind of intrusive sort of analysis as I do. Nothing is off limits for you people. And no, truly, and what isn't based on fact is then based on fiction. There isn't any aspect of my life that stories haven't been conjured up about, characters invented, stories created, and then presented to the rest of the world as if it was the gospel truth without any effort being made to actually ask me whether this is true and whether you can actually print it or show it on TV. So I think that's one of my biggest regrets, that, I mean, everybody else seems to be entitled to just that little bit of privacy. I don't even get that.
And does it get easier at all, or have you developed a thicker skin?
No, I haven't. I'd like to say I've developed a thicker skin, but this is the skin I've been born with, and I don't think it's going to get any thicker than this. Got to live with it. So I come to places like this, I let off steam, I feel a little happier, and I go back home.
Let me ask you, so as we're winding down, because I heard the first warning bell, your big idea for Jammu and Kashmir, I know you're dealing with one right now with AFSPA, but faced with this extraordinary situation where elections aren't enough, how do you interpret democracy in a state like Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, I think democracy will have to have two aspects to it. One, of course, is people's participation in elections that results in meaningful development and good governance. The other aspect is for the government of India and the governments of Pakistan to listen to both sides of Jammu and Kashmir and evolve a solution that is acceptable on both sides of the line of control. I know people get upset when we talk about the other side as well, but it is a part of the state, artificially divided. It is still a part of Jammu and Kashmir. on any map of India, it still reflects that part of Jammu and Kashmir as ours. And therefore, any solution will have to be acceptable on both sides and within this side of Jammu and Kashmir to all three regions. And I think once we do that and we listen to people and we evolve such a solution, I think that will be the true meaning of democracy for Jammu and Kashmir, and that's something that I think we can all take some satisfaction from.
Does it concern you that at a time when you are trying to reach out to an alienated constituency and say, believe in the Indian state, believe in the Indian political process, elsewhere in the country, the urban middle class has lost faith in politicians, that the Anna Hazare movement has been able to tap into that disenchantment, into that cynicism? You're an alliance partner of the Congress. What's going wrong? Why are Indians so angry right now?
Well, I think they have a right to be angry. It's not easy to be treated to a steady stream of scams one after the other. And without, without wanting to appear to be, casting some people as guilty and not guilty. The fact is, I think people are fed up of this constant diet of scams and corruption without any visible sign of action. And there's no doubt that Anna Hazare and others have been able to tap into this popular mood, but it's happened in the past. And it'll happen again in the future. I mean, that's just the way this country will evolve. I think it's happened with a little bit more ferocity this time, again, because of new social media, multiple channels, and all the rest of it. But this phase will pass as well. At best, what this will result in is a change of dispensation at the end of an election and a new government, and then the whole thing will start all over again. That's basically the way this country evolves. But beyond that, I don't think you should expect any major shake-ups.
But are our politicians communication dinosaurs in some way?
Well, some of us are.
Not you.
Well, okay. Some politicians are. You can't blame them. I mean, they started politics at a time when the audience had all the time in the world for you. I mean, you could stand on stage and speak for hours on end and people wouldn't get up. Today, the audience wants to know in 5 minutes flat, what have you done for them? What do you propose to do for them? And don't waste their time beyond that. You guys are no better. I mean, if we don't answer your question in 2.5 minutes flat, you cut us off. If we're on an OB link, it's even worse. Then you act as if the link has broken down and you don't want to listen to us. Okay? So
the moral of the story is come to the studio more often.
Well, that's one part of it. The other part of it is that you learn to, instead of clearing your throat in 2.5 minutes, you learn to finish advocating what you have to say in 2.5 minutes flat.
Well, we've had 20 odd minutes today, not 2.5. A quick last word from you. Ever thought of leaving it all, walking out of politics?
You know, I'd love to lie and tell you that the thought hasn't crossed my mind, but I'll be honest with you, over the last year and a half or so, there have been some really tough days. And there has been a time every once in a while where it's crossed my mind and I've asked myself, am I really the right person to be doing this, and shouldn't I be doing something else? But then I wake up feeling just that little bit more confident and wanting to carry on. And unless the people chase me out, like I said, I'm not really one to quit. I came from a school where the motto was never give in, and I don't want to give up.
Well, Omar Abdullah, you have, as we said, I think easily amongst the toughest jobs in the country. It's not easy, and I think a lot of us can understand what you go through. Good luck, and thank you very much.